The afternoon sun draped Atlanta in a warm, golden embrace, its rays spilling across the busy streets like liquid light. Maya Carter, a seasoned FBI agent with a sharp mind and unyielding resolve, barely registered the beauty outside her car window. Her thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in the threads of a months-long investigation that had consumed her days and stolen her nights. She was on the cusp of cracking a powerful drug cartel, a case that could shift the tides of justice in the city. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as she mentally sifted through the latest intel names, dates, and shadowy connections. A sudden burst of blue and red lights flared in her rearview mirror, jolting her from her reverie. Maya's brow furrowed as she glanced at her speedometer. The needle sat steady, well within the limit. She hadn't swerved, hadn't run a light, hadn't given any reason for a stop. A flicker of confusion danced across her face, but years of training kept her composure intact. With a calm flick of her wrist, she signaled and eased her car to the curb, the hum of her engine fading into the city's ambient roar. Behind her, a patrol car rolled to a stop, its tires crunching against the asphalt. Out stepped Officer Blake, a towering figure with a stern jaw and a uniform so crisp it seemed to crackle with authority. His hand rested on his holster, a subtle but deliberate gesture, as he approached her window. Maya lowered the glass, her expression a mask of professionalism tinged with curiosity. "Good afternoon, officer," she said, her voice smooth and measured. "Is there a problem?" Blake's gaze swept over her, cold and unyielding, like a winter wind cutting through bare branches. "License and registration," he snapped, his tone devoid of warmth or courtesy. The abruptness caught her off guard, and she arched an eyebrow, her instincts prickling. Without a word, she reached for her FBI badge, flipping it open with a practiced motion. "I'm Special Agent Maya Carter with the FBI," she said, her words steady and clear. "Here's my badge. I'm on official business. Is there an issue?" Blake's eyes flicked to the badge for a split second, barely acknowledging it before his frown deepened. "I said license and registration," he repeated, his voice growing sharper, slicing through her explanation like a blade. Maya's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the dawning realization that something was way off. She'd dealt with stubborn cops before, the kind who bristled at federal authority. But this was different. Blake's hostility wasn't just arrogance, it was a wall, impenetrable and personal. "Officer Blake," she said, her tone firm but still controlled, "as I've stated, I'm on duty. There's no cause for this to escalate." His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath the skin, and his eyes hardened into dark, unreadable pools. He leaned closer, his shadow falling over her through the open window. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. Maya froze, her breath catching for a fleeting moment. "Excuse me?" she asked, disbelief threading through her steady tone. "I said step out." Blake barked, louder now, his command drawing the eyes of pedestrians strolling along the sidewalk. "Do it now, or I'll drag you out myself." The air between them crackled with tension, thick and electric. Round them, the street began to stir. People slowed their steps, their curious glances sharpening into murmurs. A few fumbled for their phones, the soft glow of screens lighting up as they started recording. Maya's mind raced. She knew her rights, knew the law inside and out, but she also knew this was spiraling beyond reason. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, she unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed the door open. "I'm complying," she said evenly, stepping onto the pavement with her hands raised slightly, palms open, a gesture of calm amid the storm. Blake didn't wait. Before she could fully steady herself, he seized her arm, his grip bruising as he shoved her against the side of her car. "Hey, what are you doing?" Maya's voice sharpened, indignation flaring in her chest as she stumbled against the metal. "Resisting arrest, huh?" Blake sneered, twisting her arm behind her back with a force that made her wince. The cold snap of handcuffs locked around her wrists, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the tense air. "You think you can flash that badge and get away with anything? Not today." Humiliation stung her like a slap, sharp and sudden, but Maya clamped down on it, forcing her breathing to stay even. The crowd's whispers grew louder, a chorus of shock and unease rippling through the onlookers. Phones tilted toward her, capturing every angle of the cenotaph. Imposing officer and the poised, handcuffed woman in a tailored suit. Yet no one moved to intervene. Their faces, a mix of outrage and helplessness, blurred into a sea of inaction. "You're making a mistake, Officer Blake," she said, her voice low but resolute, carrying the weight of a warning. He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that grated against her ears. "Mistake? The only mistake here is you thinking you're above the law." With a rough yank, he dragged her toward his patrol car, her shoes scraping against the pavement. Maya cast a fleeting glance at the crowd-wide eyes and parted lips stared back, but still, no one stepped forward. For the first time in her career, a cold thread of powerlessness coiled around her heart. It wasn't the cuffs biting into her wrists that unnerved her. It was the raw, unchecked abuse of power unfolding in broad daylight. A violation so blatant it shook her to her core. Blake shoved her into the back seat and slammed the door with a force that rattled the frame. The car lurched forward, tires squealing as he peeled back into traffic. Inside the cramped, stuffy interior, Maya's mind churned. This wasn't a routine stop gone wrong, it felt targeted, personal. She glanced out the window, watching the crowd shrink into the distance, their phones still raised like silent witnesses. Evidence was out there, etched into digital memory. But would it matter? Blake's voice cut through her thoughts, dripping with disdain. "You really thought you could get away with pretending to be FBI, didn't you?" Her eyes narrowed, a spark of defiance igniting in her chest. "I'm not pretending," she said, her tone icy and precise. "I'm a federal agent, and you're going to regret this." He smirked, his reflection in the rearview mirror smug and unshakable. "Sure you are. And I'm the president." Maya clenched her jaw, swallowing a biting retort. Trading barbs wouldn't help her. No, she needed clarity, a plan. The car veered off the main road, winding toward the city's fringes, and her unease deepened. This wasn't the route to the central precinct. The buildings grew sparser, the streets quieter, until they pulled into the lot of a squat, dilapidated police station, its faded paint and cracked windows hinting at years of neglect. Blake parked with a jolt and yanked her door open. "Let's go, Agent," he sneered, the title laced with venomous sarcasm. Maya stepped out, her posture unbroken despite the ache in her shoulders and the growing knot in her stomach. His grip on her arm was unrelenting as he marched her inside. The station's interior was a ghost of its former self, dusty desks, flickering lights, and a handful of officers who barely looked up from their paperwork. Their indifference chilled her more than Blake's aggression. These weren't just bystanders. They were complicit, their silence a shield for his actions. He shoved her into a small interrogation room, the door banging shut behind them. The space was claustrophobic, lit by a single bulb that buzzed faintly overhead. A metal table and 2 chairs sat in the center, cold and uninviting. Blake gestured for her to sit, but left the cuffs on, a petty assertion of control. He paced before her, his boots thudding against the cracked floor. "Let's get one thing straight," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I don't care who you think you are. As far as I'm concerned, you're just another criminal who needs to be taught her place." Maya met his stare, unflinching, her dark eyes burning with quiet defiance. "And you're abusing your power," she replied, her words steady and piercing. "You know this won't hold up." He leaned in, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and sour. "You think anyone's going to believe you? You think that badge means anything here? This is my town. My rules." Her pulse thudded in her ears, but she didn't blink. "You're making a big mistake, Blake," she said softly, her voice a steel thread. "My team will come looking for me, and when they find me, they'll find you." He straightened, a cold, predatory smile curling his lips. "We'll see about that." With that, he turned and stormed out, the door slamming shut with a clang that reverberated through the room. Alone now, Maya exhaled, the sound trembling slightly as she steadied herself. The air was stale, the walls pressing in, but her mind was a whirlwind of focus. This wasn't just an arrest, it was an assault on everything she stood for, her identity, her authority, her relentless pursuit of justice. Blake's actions weren't random. There was something beneath his bravado, a hidden motive driving this reckless display of power. What was he protecting? A secret, a grudge, as she sat in the dim, suffocating room, the cuffs cutting into her skin, one truth crystallized. This was a battle she couldn't lose. Justice wasn't just her job, it was her lifeline. And Blake, with his arrogance and abuse, had just ignited a fire she'd fight to her last breath to extinguish. The consequences of his overreach would ripple far beyond these 7 minutes, exposing not just his flaws, but the cracks in a system that let men like him thrive until someone like her stood up to tear it all down. The air in the crumbling precinct was thick with a hostility that gnawed at Maya Carter's nerves, far beyond the usual petty abuses of power she'd encountered in her years as an FBI agent. This wasn't a mere slip of protocol, or an overzealous officer flexing his authority. It felt intentional, meticulously planned, and deeply personal, as though she'd been singled out for reasons she couldn't yet grasp. Time crawled by in the dimly lit interrogation room, each tick of the unseen clock amplifying her growing unease. Sitting there, wrists still tingling from the cuffs that had bound her, Maya pieced together the fragments of what she'd observed. Blake, the officer who'd dragged her here, hadn't followed any semblance of standard procedure. The detour to this rundown precinct, instead of the bustling main station, was no accident. It reeked of purpose. As she passed the handful of officers scattered through the halls, their eyes slid away from hers, their silence deafening. Not one had raised a question about Blake's actions, as if this kind of blatant overreach was just another day at the office. The realization settled heavily in her chest. This wasn't just corruption, it was a system, a quiet, complicit machine. The door groaned on its hinges, shattering her spiraling thoughts. A younger officer stepped into the room, his posture rigid with a tension that seemed to pull at every muscle in his body. His name tag glinted faintly under the flickering fluorescent light. Officer Ryan. In one hand, he clutched a clipboard like it was a lifeline, his knuckles whitening around its edges. His eyes darted anywhere but toward Maya, settling instead on the cracked linoleum floor as he shuffled forward. "Agent Carter," he began, his voice barely more than a nervous murmur, trembling with an uncertainty he couldn't hide. I need some basic information from you. For processing." His words hung awkwardly in the air, and Maya tilted her head, her sharp gaze dissecting him. He was young Mabe, mid-20s, his face still soft with traces of inexperience. But there was something else there too, a flicker of doubt, a hesitation that made his movements jerky, his breath uneven. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked toward the door, as if he feared an intrusion or perhaps hoped for one to spare him this moment. Maya's brow arched, her voice cutting through the stifling silence with unwavering calm. "You already know who I am. What's really going on here, Officer Ryan?" Her tone was firm, a quiet challenge wrapped in composure, daring him to meet her eyes. Ryan froze, his pen hovering uselessly above the clipboard, a bead of sweat glistening at his temple. For a heartbeat, he seemed caught, suspended between duty and something deeper gnawing at him. "I'm just following orders," he muttered, the words so faint they barely reached her, his voice cracking under the weight of his own excuse. Maya leaned forward, her elbows resting on the scarred table, her eyes boring into him. "You've seen what's happening here, haven't you?" she pressed, her words sharp yet measured, slicing through his fragile defenses. "This isn't right, and you know it." Ryan's grip on the clipboard tightened until his fingers trembled, his lips parting as if to speak, only to snap shut again. His gaze darted to the door once more, a hunted look flashing across his face. The room pulsed with unspoken tension, the air heavy with truths neither dared fully voice. Before Ryan could muster a response, the door burst open with a force that rattled the walls, and Blake stormed in like a thunderclap. His presence filled the room, oppressive and suffocating, a storm of arrogance and barely restrained fury. His broad shoulders blocked the doorway, his uniform crisp yet somehow menacing, as if it were armor for the chaos he wielded. "What's taking so damn long, Ryan?" he barked, his voice a jagged edge that made the younger officer flinch. His dark eyes narrowed as they fixed on Ryan, who shrank under the weight of that glare. "She's not a puzzle to solve. Get her processed and into holding." "We don't have all day." Ryan stammered out a hasty apology, his discomfort palpable, his hands fumbling with the clipboard as if it might shield him from Blake's wrath. But Blake barely acknowledged him, his attention shifting to Maya with a sneer that twisted his rugged features. into something almost feral. "Enjoying the accommodations, Agent Carter," he taunted, leaning casually against the doorframe. Though his posture radiated menace, "Don't get to Kazai, things are just getting started." Maya met his gaze unflinchingly, her hazel eyes steady and defiant, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. "You're digging yourself into a deeper hole, Officer Blake," she said coolly, her voice a blade of ice. "My team will come looking for me, and when they do, they'll uncover every dirty little secret you're hiding." Blake's chuckle rumbled low and dark, a sound that sent a shiver down Ryan's spine as he stood awkwardly to the side. "Your team won't find you in time, Carter," Blake shot back, shaking his head with mock pity. "By the time they realize you're gone, it'll be too late." He straightened, his towering frame casting a shadow across the room, and jabbed a finger toward Ryan. "Get her out of my sight," he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. "Now." Ryan hesitated, his eyes flickering between Maya and Blake, a storm of conflict raging behind his boyish features. For a fleeting moment, Maya thought he might push back, might find the courage to defy the monster in the room, but then his shoulders sagged, and with a reluctant nod, he stepped toward her. "Let's go," he said quietly, his voice barely audible as he unlocked her cuffs with trembling hands. His fingers brushed her wrist briefly, and she caught the faintest tremor in his touch. Fear, guilt, or both. As he motioned for her to stand, Maya rose with deliberate grace, her every movement a quiet assertion of her strength. The walk down the narrow hallway felt like a descent into a crypt, the precinct's eerie silence pressing in around them. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting harsh shadows on the peeling walls. The few officers they passed kept their heads down, their faces blank, their indifference a chilling testament to Blake's chokehold on this place. Maya memorized every detail: scuff marks on the floor, the faint hum of a distant radio, the way Ryan's boots dragged slightly with each step, as if he were carrying an invisible burden. They stopped at a small holding cell at the hall's end, its rusted bars looming like the jaws of a trap. Ryan fumbled with the keys, his hands unsteady. Before swinging the door open and gesturing for her to enter, Maya paused, turning to face him fully, her gaze piercing through the haze of his doubt. "You still have a choice," she said, her voice low but resolute, each word a lifeline tossed into the abyss of his conscience. "You don't have to go along with this." Ryan's shoulders slumped further, his eyes glistening with a guilt he couldn't voice. He muttered something under his breath, too soft, too broken for her to catch, before shutting the cell door with a clang that echoed down the hall. As he walked away, his footsteps retreating into the stillness, Maya sank onto the cold metal bench bolted to the wall. The cell was stark and unforgiving, its concrete walls stained with years of neglect, the air damp and biting. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she assessed her predicament. No phone, no immediate way to reach her team, and no clear allies in this forsaken precinct except, perhaps, Ryan. But could she trust him? His hesitation hinted at a shred of decency, but it was fragile, teetering on the edge of Blake's iron grip. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of heavy boots echoing down the corridor. Purposeful and unhurried, Blake appeared outside the cell, his silhouette framed by the bars, his smug grin cutting through the dim light like a blade. "Comfortable?" he mocked, leaning against the bars with a casual cruelty that made her skin crawl. "You should get used to it. You are going to be here a while." Maya didn't rise to the bait, her expression unyielding as she studied him. He smirked, clearly relishing her silence. "You must be wondering why I'm doing this," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Why I pulled you over, why I brought you here. You want to feel powerful," Maya replied flatly, her tone stripped of emotion, cutting through his bravado. "This is just about stroking your ego." For a split second, Blake's smirk faltered, a shadow of something darker, maybe even fear flickering across his face. "This isn't about ego," he snapped, his voice dropping to a cold, dangerous edge. "This is about teaching people like you a lesson. You think you can waltz into my town, flash your badge, and not face consequences." Maya tilted her head, her eyes narrowing as she probed deeper. "What are you afraid of, Blake?" she asked, her words deliberate, searching for the crack in his armor. His expression hardened, his jaw clenching as he stepped closer to the bars. "I'm not afraid of anything," he growled, his voice a low snarl. "You, on the other hand, should be very afraid." With that, he turned on his heel and stalked off, leaving her alone once more in the suffocating quiet. As the hours dragged on, Maya's mind churned, replaying his words, sifting through the fragments of this twisted puzzle. This wasn't just about her badge or her authority. Blake was hiding something. Something he'd go to desperate lengths to protect. Her instincts screamed that this was bigger than a single corrupt cop, that she'd stumbled into the heart of something sinister. Escape would take more than courage, it would take allies, and Ryan might be her only shot. But his loyalty was a fragile thread, stretched thin under Blake's relentless pressure. Meanwhile, the precinct's stillness wrapped around Officer Ryan like a shroud as he trudged back to his desk, his boots scuffing against the worn floor. The clipboard he'd clung to during that tense encounter now pressed against his chest, a flimsy barrier against the guilt clawing at him. He sank into his chair, avoiding the gazes of the few officers nearby, some hunched over paperwork, others staring blankly at flickering screens, all studiously ignoring the tension that hung like smoke in the air. Everyone knew how Blake operated, his temper a live wire, his word law. Crossing him meant ruined transfers to nowhere posts, fabricated charges, or worse. Ryan's eyes drifted toward the interrogation room, where Blake now lounged, feet propped on the table, his laughter booming over a phone call. The sight twisted Ryan's stomach into knots. Blake always carried himself like a king, but this time there was an edge to it, a sharpness that hinted at something deeper than his usual power plays. Ryan's thoughts drifted back to the moment he'd glimpsed Maya's FBI badge, gold and unmistakable, tucked into her wallet when Blake had tossed it aside. It wasn't a fake. He'd stake his life on it. The way she held herself, the quiet authority in her voice, was no imposter. So why was Blake treating her like some petty criminal? Ryan. Blake's voice sliced through his reverie, sharp and commanding. Ryan jolted, turning to see Blake leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. A smug grin plastered across his face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Blake said, his tone teasing but laced with a warning. "Don't tell me you're going soft on me." Ryan forced a weak laugh, shaking his head. "No, sir, just thinking." Blake's grin widened, but his eyes remained cold, calculating. "Good. Keep it that way," he said, his voice dropping to a steely edge. "This is my precinct. You follow my orders, and everything stays fine." Ryan nodded mechanically, but his gut churned, a sickening mix of dread and shame. Blake lingered for a moment, his gaze boring into him, before sauntering back into the room with a swagger that screamed untouchable. Alone again, Ryan buried his face in his hands, his breath shallow and ragged. He despised himself as cowardice, his willingness to bend under Blake's thumb time and again. But what choice did he have? Blake held this place in a vice grip, and defiance wasn't just risky, it was suicidal. Yet Maya's words echoed relentlessly in his mind. "You've seen what's happening here, haven't you? This isn't right, and you know it." He glanced toward the hallway leading to the holding cells, his heart pounding against his ribs, guilt warred with fear, frustration clawing at his resolve. He couldn't keep pretending this was normal. Back in her cell, Maya sat with her back against the wall, her mind a whirlwind of strategy and suspicion. Blake's arrogance wasn't just bravado, it was a mask, concealing something he feared losing control over. Justice, she realized, wasn't just about her freedom, it was about exposing the rot festering here, the consequences of unchecked power that had twisted this precinct into a fiefdom. Ryan was the key, a reluctant pawn teetering on the edge of rebellion. She'd seen the crack in his facade, guilt in his eyes, the tremble in his hands. If she could reach him, pull him across that line, she might turn the tide. But time was slipping away, and every second tightened the noose Blake had fashioned for her. Escape hinged on more than her own will. It demanded trust in a man who might yet break under the weight of his own choices. In the stillness of the dimly lit cell, Maya's voice cut through the air, steady and unwavering despite the weight of her circumstances. "We need to talk," she said, her tone a blend of calm resolve and unshakable conviction. Her words hung there, deliberate, as if she'd spent hours rehearsing them in her mind, knowing they'd find their mark. Across from her, Ryan faltered, his broad shoulders tensing as he cast a quick, nervous glance over his shoulder toward the shadowed hallway beyond the bars. "I'm not supposed to be here," he mumbled under his breath, his voice rough with unease. Barely loud enough to reach her, his fingers twitched at his sides, betraying the storm brewing inside him. "And I'm not supposed to be locked up in this cell," Maya shot back, her words sharp like the edge of a blade, slicing through his hesitation. "Yet here we are, caught in this mess together." Ryan shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his boots scuffing faintly against the grimy concrete floor. His eyes flickered between Maya's unflinching gaze and the empty corridor, as though he expected someone Blake, perhaps to materialize from the shadows and catch him in this forbidden exchange. "Look," he started, his voice low and strained. "I don't know what Blake's got against you, but I can't." His words stumbled to a halt as Maya leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the cold metal bench she sat on. "Yes, you can," she interrupted, her voice rising just enough to command his full attention. "You know this isn't right, Ryan. You know I don't belong in here. Blake's pulling strings, using you and everyone else in this precinct like pawns to hide whatever dirty secrets he's tangled up in." Her accusation landed like a punch, and Ryan froze, his breath catching in his throat. Maya's words weren't just a challenge, they were a mirror, forcing him to confront the gnawing doubt he'd buried deep. She pressed on, her voice steady but insistent. "Think about it, Ryan. Why drag me here, to this rundown outpost, instead of the main station? Why's he so hell-bent on keeping me cut off from my team?" Ryan's lips parted as if to argue, but no sound came. His face twisted with conflict, a silent war raging behind his tired ice loyalty to the precinct clashing with the truth he couldn't unsee. Maya softened her tone, sensing his turmoil, and leaned closer. "You don't have to be his tool in this, Ryan. You can choose to do what's right." The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with unspoken fears and the weight of what might come next. Ryan stared at her, his hands clenching into fists, then relaxing, then clenching again, a rhythm of indecision. Finally, his voice broke through, barely a whisper, trembling with the strain of defiance. "You don't get it, Maya. Blakey's got this place in a chokehold. If I cross him, I'm finished. My career, my life here's over." Maya nodded slowly, her expression softening with understanding, though her resolve didn't waver. "I know you're scared," she said gently. "I get it. But ask yourself this, if you don't stand up now, when will you? How many more people like me will Blake crush under his boot before someone stops him?" Ryan dropped his gaze to the floor, his jaw tightening until the muscles twitched beneath his skin. The question lingered, heavy and unyielding, sinking into the cracks of his conscience. After what felt like an eternity, he let out a deep, shuddering sigh, the sound echoing faintly off the cell's bare walls. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm, as though he'd crossed an invisible line he couldn't step back from. Later, in the precinct's cramped break room, Ryan sat alone at a chipped wooden table, a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee trembling in his hands. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly, casting harsh shadows across his face. His leg bounced uncontrollably beneath the table, a restless tick that betrayed the chaos swirling in his mind. Every tick of the clock on the wall felt like a hammer striking his nerves, each second piling more weight onto the decision he'd made. Earlier that day, he'd slipped a small notepad and pen into Maya's cell, a simple act, but one that felt monumental, like handing her a lifeline in a sea of corruption. He didn't know exactly what she'd do with it, but a flicker of trust had sparked within him, brighter than the fear he felt toward Blake. The door swung open with a sudden creak, and Ryan's heart lurched into his throat. Blake strode in, his heavy boots thudding against the linoleum floor, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud rolling in. The older officer moved with sharp, deliberate precision, snatching a chipped mug from the counter and pouring coffee without so much as a glance at Ryan. "You've been real quiet today," Blake said, his voice deceptively casual, though it carried an edge that made Ryan's stomach twist. "Everything all right?" Ryan forced a quick nod, his throat dry. "Yeah," he replied, too fast, his attempt at nonchalance crumbling under Blake's scrutiny. The senior officer turned slowly, his piercing gray eyes locking onto Ryan's, studying him like a predator sizing up prey. Ryan's skin prickled under that gaze, a cold sweat breaking out at the base of his neck. "You sure about that?" Blake pressed, his tone darkening. "You're not getting any funny ideas, are you?" Ryan shook his head, managing a weak laugh that sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Of course not." Blake's lips curled into a smirk, but his eyes remained icy, unyielding. "Good," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "'Cause I'd hate to think you're forgetting who's in charge around here." Ryan nodded again, gripping his mug so tightly his knuckles whitened. Blake lingered for a moment longer, his presence a silent threat, before turning and sauntering out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him, and Ryan exhaled a shaky breath, his shoulders slumping as the tension drained from his body. Back in her cell, Maya hunched over the notepad Ryan had risked so much to give her, her pen flying across the pages with frantic urgency. The dim light filtering through the barred window barely illuminated the cramped space, but she didn't need much to see the truth spilling from her memory onto the paper. License plates she'd memorized, names she'd overheard, addresses she'd pieced together every scrap of evidence. She could recall about Blake's shadowy dealings poured out in jagged, hurried script. Her mind raced as she wrote, weaving the fragments into a plan. If she could get this to her team, it might be enough to unravel Blake's web of corruption and bring him down for good. But for now, she was trapped, dependent on Ryan's fragile courage. Footsteps echoed down the hall, and Maya tensed, her pulse quickening. She shoved the notepad into the waistband of her pants, smoothing her shirt over it just as Blake's hulking figure appeared outside her cell. "You look busy," he said, his voice dripping with mockery as he leaned against the bars, his arms crossed. Maya met his gaze without flinching, her chin lifting slightly in defiance. "Just waiting for my lawyer," she replied coolly, her tone a quiet challenge. Blake chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "Keep dreaming, Carter," he sneered, shaking his head. "No one's coming for you." He turned and walked away, his boots clomping heavily against the floor. But Maya's resolve only deepened. Someone was coming for her, should make sure of it. She just had to hold on a little longer. As Blake's shadow faded into the distance, Maya clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Time was slipping through her fingers like sand, and Ryan's choice to help her was a fragile thread in a tapestry of danger. Would he hold steady when Blake's suspicions inevitably turned on him? She couldn't wait to find out. She needed to act, to push forward, but first, she had to test the depth of Ryan's commitment. If he faltered, she'd carve her own path out, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Ryan paced the narrow corridor outside the holding cells, his footsteps echoing in the stillness, his pulse hammered in his ears, a relentless drumbeat of doubt and fear. Slipping Maya that notepad had been a bold move, a crack in the dam of his obedience to Blake. But now the reality of what came next loomed over him like a guillotine. Helping her escape wasn't just a breach of protocol, it was a death knell for his career. A reckless leap that could paint a target on his back for Blake's wrath. And Blake was no ordinary foe. The man was a tempest of rage and pride, his short fuse and towering ego making him dangerous when cornered. Maya, with her sharp mind and fearless defiance, was everything Blake despised, a threat he couldn't intimidate into submission. Ryan raked a hand through his sweat-dampened hair, his temples throbbing. He was at a crossroads, double down on helping Maya and risk everything, or pull back and leave her to face Blake's fury alone. The weight of it pressed down on his chest, suffocating him. Then, Blake's voice sliced through the haze of his thoughts, sharp and commanding. "Ryan." The sound of boots pounding against the concrete snapped Ryan upright, his heart slamming against his ribs. Blake stormed toward him, his broad frame filling the hallway, his eyes glinting with suspicion. "You still hanging around back here?" he asked, his tone light but laced with menace. Ryan swallowed hard, forcing his voice to steady. "Just making rounds, sir." Blake smirked, stepping closer until his shadow loomed over Ryan. "Good," he said, his voice dropping to a growl. "You keep those eyes open. We can't have anyone poking their nose where it doesn't belong." The threat was unmistakable, coiled beneath the casual words like a snake ready to strike. Ryan nodded, his throat tight. "Of course." Blake clapped him on the shoulder, his grip lingering a beat too long, then strode off. His boots echoing down the hall, Ryan's fists clenched at his sides, his breath ragged. He couldn't straddle the line anymore if he was in. He had to be all in. Back in the cell, Maya's pen scratched against the notepad with relentless focus, her handwriting a chaotic sprawl of determination. She cataloged every detail she could dredge up about Blake's operation states of suspicious transfers, names of shady contacts, locations tied to late-night meetings. Each word was a brick in the wall she was building, a case that could topple Blake's empire if it reached the right hands. Footsteps approached again, and she stiffened, tucking the notepad away just as Ryan appeared outside her cell. His face was pale, but his jaw was set with a quiet resolve that hadn't been there before. "Ryan," she said, her voice calm but firm, "you've made it this far. Are you ready to take the next step?" He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if Blake might materialize behind him. "If I do this," he whispered, his voice trembling with the weight of it, "there's no going back." Maya stepped closer to the bars, her eyes locked on his. "There's no going back for me either," she said. "Blake won't stop unless we make him. If we don't act now, he'll bury me and anyone else who gets in his way." Ryan's jaw tightened, and after a long, agonizing moment, he nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion. He fumbled with the keys at his belt, unlocking the cell door with shaking hands. "We have to be quick," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Blake's in his office, but if he finds out, then we move." Maya cut in, stepping out of the cell with a surge of adrenaline. Ryan led her through a labyrinth of back hallways, avoiding the main corridors where other officers might spot them. The precinct was a maze of flickering lights and peeling paint, the air thick with the stale scent of coffee and cigarette smoke. Every distant sound a creaking door, a muffled laugh made Ryan flinch, his nerves frayed to the breaking point. "Where are we going?" Maya asked, her voice hushed but steady. "Back exit," Ryan replied, casting a quick glance over his shoulder. "It's not monitored. We can get to my car from there." Maya nodded, her mind racing. Blake's paranoia had been palpable from the moment she'd arrived, had chosen this isolated precinct for a reason, and she doubted he'd left their escape route unguarded by chance. As they rounded a corner, the sound of voices froze them in their tracks. Two officers lingered by a vending machine, their laughter cutting through the tension like a blade. Ryan gestured for Maya to stay back, then approached them with a forced grin. "Hey, guys," he said, leaning casually against the wall to block their view of the hallway. "Long shift, huh?" One of the officers, a weary man with a scruffy beard, chuckled. "Tell me about it." The other, a stocky woman with tired eyes, smirked. "Blake's been in a mood today, hasn't he?" Ryan nodded, seizing the opening. "When isn't he?" Maya watched from the shadows, her breath shallow but controlled, every muscle coiled and ready to move. The seconds stretched into an eternity, each word from the officers a delay she couldn't afford. Finally, they wandered off, their voices fading into the distance, and Ryan waved her forward. They darted through the dim corridors, their footsteps quick and silent, until they reached a heavy metal door at the back of the precinct. Ryan's hands shook as he unlocked it, the keys jangling faintly in the stillness. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow alley shrouded in mist. "This way," he said, stepping into the night, and Maya followed, her heart pounding with the promise of freedom and the certainty that Blake's reckoning was only beginning. In that moment, as they slipped into the shadows, the lesson of justice burned bright in Maya's mind. Blake's abuse of power had built a cage around her, but it was his own arrogance that would bring it crashing down. For Ryan, the choice to act was a fragile step toward redemption, a chance to reclaim the integrity he'd nearly lost to fear. The consequences of unchecked authority loomed large, a warning etched into every risk they took, a reminder that power, when wielded without accountability, sowed the seeds of its own destruction. The night was heavy with silence as Ryan guided Maya toward a modest sedan, tucked away at the far end of the dimly lit parking lot. Her breath caught in her throat, a mixture of adrenaline and dread coursing through her veins as she slipped into the passenger seat. The leather creaked faintly beneath her, cold against her skin, and she cast a quick, anxious glance out the window. The street beyond lay barren, swallowed by shadows, the stillness amplifying the pounding of her heart. Ryan slid behind the wheel, his movements deliberate but tense, and turned the key. The engine sputtered to life with a low growl, shattering the quiet. "Are you sure we're in the clear?" Maya asked, her voice hushed yet sharp with urgency. Her eyes darting to the rearview mirror as if expecting headlights to flare up at any moment. "For now," Ryan muttered, easing the car onto the road with a cautious turn of the wheel. His tone was clipped. His focus split between the path ahead and the shrinking silhouette of the precinct in the mirror. "But if Blake figures out you're gone, he won't just sit there. He'll hunt us down." The words hung between them, heavy with the weight of truth. Maya shifted in her seat, her jaw tightening as she stared at Ryan. The faint glow of passing streetlights flickered across his face, revealing the strain etched into his features, lines of worry he couldn't hide. "I need to get in touch with my team," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. "They have to know what's happening before it's too late." Ryan shot her a sidelong glance, his fingers tightening around the steering wheel until his knuckles gleamed pale in the dark. "Blake took your phone, didn't he?" "Yeah," Maya admitted, frustration simmering beneath her calm exterior. "But there's a gas station a few miles up the road. If they've got a payphone, I can make the call." Ryan nodded, a curt dip of his chin, his grip unrelenting. "All right, but we can't linger. If Blake realizes we're slipping out of the city, he'll have his people on us before we can blink." Maya leaned back, her shoulders sinking into the seat as the reality of their escape settled over her like a cold fog. Getting out of the precinct had been a desperate, heart-pounding victory, but it was only the first move in a deadly game. Now, they had to outrun Blakey, a man whose power stretched far beyond the badge he wore, a man who wielded authority like a weapon and wouldn't hesitate to crush anyone who threatened his control. Back at the precinct, the air crackled with tension as Blake stormed into his office, the door slamming shut behind him with a force that rattled the walls. His chest heaved, his carefully polished veneer cracking under the pressure of his rage. He'd just stepped away for a brief phone call, a routine check-in, only to return and find Maya's cell empty, her absence a silent taunt that ignited a fire in his gut. His hands clenched into fists, nails digging into his palms as the realization hit him like a freight train. "Ryan," he snarled under his breath, the name dripping with venom. It wasn't just Maya who'd slipped through his fingers, it was Ryan too, the quiet officer who'd always lingered on the edges, watching, listening. Blake's mind raced, piecing together the betrayal, and his fury erupted as he tore out of the room, his polished shoes pounding against the linoleum floor. "Where's Ryan?" he barked at the nearest officer, a young man barely out of training, whose wide eyes betrayed his confusion. "I haven't seen him in a while, sir," the officer stammered, shrinking under Blake's towering presence. "Get every unit on the line," Blake snapped, his voice a thunderclap that sent the officer scrambling. "We've got a runner." The young man hesitated, his brow furrowing. "A runner? Who just do it?" Blake roared, cutting him off with a glare that could have melted steel. The officer fumbled for his radio, his hands trembling as Blake seized his own, his mind already spinning with strategies. He'd underestimated Maya Carter, a mistake that gnawed at him now. She wasn't just some officer he could intimidate. She was a threat, potentially armed with evidence that could unravel everything he'd built. But Blake wasn't a man who let power slip away. He thrived on control, and he'd drag her back, make her pay for daring to defy him. The precinct buzzed with frantic energy as his orders crackled over the radios, officers rushing to comply, their boots echoing through the halls. Meanwhile, miles away, the sedan hummed along the empty highway, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a lifeline. Maya sat rigid, her gaze flicking between the road ahead and the side mirror, searching for any sign of pursuit. Ryan's hands were locked on the wheel, his posture stiff, his breathing shallow. "Blake won't just sit back," he said, breaking the silence, his voice taut with strain. "He's coming for us." Maya turned to him, her expression calm but resolute. "I'm counting on it, but we're not going to let him catch us off guard." She leaned forward slightly, her mind already mapping out their next steps. "I need a phone, Ryan." He nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. "There's a gas station up the highway. It's off the main route. Blake might not think to look there right away." The plan was thin, but it was something, and Maya clung to it, her thoughts racing ahead to Agent Walker, her FBI lifeline. She needed him to mobilize, to dig into Blake's corruption before the man could bury his tracks. The gas station emerged on the horizon, a lonely outpost bathed in the flickering glow of fluorescent lights. Its isolation both a comfort and a risk. Ryan pulled into the lot, parking along the shadowed side of the building, his eyes scanning the surroundings with a vigilance born of fear. "We can't stay long," he warned, his voice barely above a whisper as he killed the engine. Maya stepped out, the night air biting at her skin, carrying the sharp tang of gasoline and the faint rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement. Every sound felt magnified, the crunch of gravel under her boots, the buzz of the overhead lights, the distant yelp of a stray dog echoing through the stillness. She moved with purpose, her instincts honed from years on the job, and spotted the payphone mounted near the wall, its metal frame scratched and weathered. Reaching into her waistband, she pulled out the small notepad Ryan had slipped her earlier, a lifeline of scribbled names, dates, and connections she'd pieced together in the chaos of her captivity. It was raw, incomplete, but it was enough to start building a case that could topple Blake's empire. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed Walker's number. The cold receiver pressed against her ear. It rang twice before his voice cut through, brisk and familiar. "Walker here, it's Carter," she replied, her tone steady despite the urgency clawing at her chest. "I'm in deep, and I need you to move fast." There was a pause, the faint sound of papers rustling on his end. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice dropping with concern. "Blake," she said simply, the name carrying the weight of her accusation. "He's dirty. He locked me up without cause, and now he's coming after me to keep me quiet. I got out with help, but he's got the whole precinct hunting us," Walker cursed softly, the sound muffled but sharp. "Where are you?" "About 10 miles outside Atlanta, Route 7, at a gas station. But we're on borrowed time. Blake won't stop until he finds us." "All right," Walker said, his tone shifting to command. "Stay put as long as you can. I'll send a team, but it'll take time. Watch your back, Carter. Blake's not going down without a fight." She hung up, her pulse racing as she absorbed his warning. Backup was coming, but the road ahead was still a minefield, and Blake's shadow loomed larger with every passing second. She returned to the car, sliding into the seat with a composure that masked the storm inside her. Ryan's eyes flicked to her, searching for answers. "Did you get them?" "Yeah," she said, nodding. "My team's on the way, but we've got to keep moving until they catch up." His grip tightened on the wheel, the leather creaking under his fingers. "You think Blake'll figure out we stopped here?" Maya met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Not if we're gone before he gets the chance." The engine roared back to life, and they peeled onto the highway, the endless stretch of asphalt swallowing them whole. The tension in the car was a living thing, thick and suffocating, as the city lights faded into a distant memory. At the precinct, chaos reigned. Blake's office had become a war room, officers darting in and out, their faces pale under his unrelenting glare. "She's gone," he growled into his radio, his voice a razor's edge of fury. "And she's not alone." "Alone, sir," an officer ventured, his hesitation met with a scowl that silenced him. "I want every unit on the road," Blake ordered, his tone brooking no argument. "Set up checkpoints on every highway out of the city." "She can't have gotten far." He slammed the radio down, his breath ragged, his mind a whirlwind of calculation. Maya was cunning, but he was relentless. She wouldn't escape it when his entire world hung in the balance. Out on the highway, Maya kept her eyes glued to the side mirror, the darkness pressing against the windows like a shroud. Headlights flickered faintly in the distance, a whisper of danger growing louder. "We need a plan," Ryan said, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine. "Running's not enough. Running's keeping us alive," Maya countered, her tone firm. "Blake's got the precinct's resources, but I've got my team. We stay ahead until they close in." Ryan shook his head, doubt shadowing his features. "And if they don't make it in time, what then?" Her gaze locked onto his, unwavering. "Then I'll take him down myself." His jaw clenched, disbelief warring with fear. "You're insane. Blake's not just some corrupt cough's a predator. If he catches us before your team does, I know what he is." She cut in, her voice sharp. But I didn't spend my life chasing justice just to let a man like him win. Silence fell, heavy and fraught, as the headlights in the mirror grew brighter, closer. "Maya," Ryan said, his voice tight with alarm. "We've got company." She turned, her senses sharpening as a black SUV roared into view, its speed relentless. "It's him," she said, her calm belying the fire in her chest. "Floor it." Ryan slammed the gas, the car surging forward with a guttural roar. The SUV pursued, its headlights blazing like the eyes of a beast, illuminating the road in a stark, unforgiving glare. The chase was on, a collision course of Wills Blake's hunger for control pitted against Maya's unyielding fight for justice. Every screech of the tires, every jolt of the car, underscored the lesson burning in her soul. Power, when abused, bred consequences. And she'd see Blake face his, no matter the cost. The tires squealed as Ryan yanked the wheel hard, veering the car off the smooth pavement and onto a rugged dirt road. The world around them shifted in an instant. Towering trees closed in like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches stretching out to form a claustrophobic canopy overhead. The forest swallowed the faint glow of civilization, leaving only the dim wash of moonlight to guide their frantic escape. Inside the car, Maya's chest tightened with every shallow breath she took. Her pulse hammered in her ears, a relentless drumbeat of fear and defiance. She knew the stakes were impossibly high, the odds stacked against them like a house of cards teetering on the edge of collapse. But one truth burned brighter than her terror. Blake would not stop, not until someone forced his hand. This twisting, treacherous road, would it lead them to freedom or deliver them straight into his grasp? The car jolted violently as it hit the uneven terrain, the suspension groaning under the strain. Ryan's hands clamped around the steering wheel, his knuckles bleaching white as he fought to keep the vehicle from spinning out of control. Dust and gravel sprayed in their wake, a gritty cloud that shimmered faintly in the rearview mirror. Behind them, the black SUV roared closer, its headlights slicing through the night like the eyes of a relentless predator. The towering pines cast long, ghostly shadows that danced across the narrow path, their skeletal limbs scraping against the car's sides as if trying to pull them back. Maya's gaze darted to the side mirror, her dark eyes narrowing as the SUV's lights grew larger, brighter, their glare piercing the suffocating darkness. "Faster, Ryan," she urged, her voice sharp with desperation, cutting through the rumble of the engine. "I'm pushing this thing as hard as it'll go," Ryan snapped back, his tone fraying at the edges. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his jaw clenched tight as the car lurched over a pothole. The impact sent a bone-rattling shudder through the frame, nearly throwing them into the trees. Maya braced herself against the dashboard, her mind spinning like a storm. Blake was out there, a shadow growing larger with every second they failed to shake him. If they didn't find a way to lose him soon, he'd have them pinned, trapped like prey with nowhere left to run. Her eyes flicked to the windshield, scanning the twisting path ahead. Then she saw a faint trail branching off to the right, barely visible beneath the overgrowth. "Turn up ahead," she shouted, pointing with a trembling hand. Ryan didn't hesitate. He jerked the wheel with a grunt, sending the car careening onto the narrower path. Tires churned up a flurry of dirt and stones, the forest swallowing them deeper into its embrace. The air grew thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the trees pressing in tighter, their branches clawing at the windows. But the relief was fleeting. The SUV followed without missing a beat, its engine snarling like a beast hot on the scent of blood. "They're not letting up," Ryan yelled, his voice cracking as panic seeped into his words. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, wide with the realization that their pursuers were gaining ground. Maya's sharp gaze swept the surroundings, her mind racing for an escape. The trail was shrinking, the trees crowding closer until the path was little more than a thread winding through the wilderness. They couldn't outrun Blake like this. The car was a liability now, a clunky target begging to be caught. "We need to ditch the car," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Ryan shot her a look, his brow furrowing in disbelief. "Are you out of your mind?" he sputtered, his hands still wrestling with the wheel. "Do you have a better idea?" Maya fired back, her tone edged with urgency. "This trail's too tight. If we keep driving, he'll run us down. On foot, we can disappear into the trees. Ryan's lips pressed into a thin line, doubt flickering in his eyes, but the truth of her words sank in. And after a heartbeat of hesitation, he nodded. "Fine, but we'd better move fast." He slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt with a grinding crunch as the tires dug into the loose dirt. Maya flung her door open before the dust had even settled, her boots hitting the ground with purpose. She scanned the forest for cover, her fingers instinctively grabbing the notepad tucked at her waistband and slipping it into her jacket, pressing it close to her chest like a lifeline. "Go," she barked, waving Ryan out of the driver's seat. He stumbled after her, his breath ragged as they plunged into the trees. The underbrush swallowed the sound of their footsteps, muffling their frantic escape in a carpet of moss and fallen leaves. Behind them, the SUV screeched to a stop, its doors slamming open with a force that reverberated through the night. Heavy boots crunched against the gravel, and sharp voices barked orders into the stillness. Maya didn't dare look back, but she could feel Blake's presence, a cold, unyielding force drawing nearer with every step. He wasn't alone, either. He'd brought others, a pack of hunters closing in on their quarry. The forest was a maze of twisted branches and uneven ground, the moonlight struggling to pierce the dense canopy overhead. Shadows draped the world in a cloak of uncertainty, every rustle and snap amplifying the tension coiled in Maya's chest. She moved with the precision of someone trained for this, her steps quick but measured, her senses attuned to the chaos around her. Ryan, though, faltered behind her, his breathing loud and uneven as he tripped over roots and stumbled through the brush. "Where are we even going?" he whispered harshly, his voice trembling with exhaustion and fear. "Anywhere but here," Maya replied, her tone low and steady despite the storm raging inside her. "We need distance, more space between us and them." A branch snapped nearby, sharp and deliberate, and both of them froze mid-step. The sound was faint, but unmistakably a hunter closing in. Maya's hand shot out, grabbing Ryan's arm and yanking him into the shadow of a massive oak. They crouched low, their breaths shallow and ragged, the damp earth cold against their knees. The voices were closer now, clipped and urgent, punctuated by the static crackle of radios. Then Blake's voice cut through the night, cold and commanding, a blade of ice in the darkness. "Spread out," he ordered. They're on foot, they couldn't have gone far. Maya's jaw tightened, her teeth grinding together as she pressed herself deeper into the shadows. Blake wasn't guessing, he knew. He could sense them, his instincts honed by years of wielding power like a weapon. Time stretched thin as they crept through the forest, moving only when the voices faded into the distance. The darkness was a double-edged sword hiding them from sight, but turning every step into a gamble on treacherous ground. Ryan tripped again, his foot catching on a hidden route. He caught himself just before he hit the dirt, but the stumble drew a sharp hiss from Maya. "Keep it together," she whispered, her eyes flashing with a mix of frustration and urgency. "I'm trying," Ryan shot back, his voice quivering as he steadied himself. "I didn't sign up for this, Maya." Her gaze softened for a fleeting moment, a flicker of empathy breaking through her resolve. "You signed up the second you chose to stand with me," she said firmly. "We can't afford mistakes now. Stay close and stay quiet." Ryan swallowed hard, nodding as he pulled himself together, his fear warring with a growing resolve. The sound of footsteps grew louder again, boots crunching through the undergrowth with purpose. Maya's heart thudded against her ribcage, each beat a countdown to discovery. They needed a hiding place somewhere Blake's predatory gaze wouldn't reach. Her eyes darted through the gloom, catching on a cluster of boulders half buried in the earth, their jagged outlines softened by a tangle of thick shrubs. She gestured silently, and Ryan followed her lead, the two of them squeezing into the narrow crevice between the rocks, the cold stone pressed against their backs, unyielding and unforgiving. As Maya peered through a gap in the foliage, her breath slow and deliberate, a figure emerged from the trees, a flashlight beam slicing through the darkness like a scythe. It swept over the forest floor, inching closer to their hiding spot with every pass. Then Blake stepped into view, his silhouette sharp and menacing, his face etched with a predator's focus. He paused just feet away, the beam of his light illuminating the ground where their footprints faded into the underbrush. Maya held her breath, every muscle in her body coiled tight, ready to spring. Ryan's hand gripped her arm, his fingers trembling with barely contained panic. Blake's radio crackled, shattering the silence. "Anything?" a voice asked, tinny and distant. "Not yet," Blake replied, his tone dripping with frustration. He scanned the area one last time, his eyes glinting with cold determination, before turning away, the flashlight beam fading into the trees. Maya exhaled silently, her grip tightening on the notepad as the voices receded. They emerged from their hiding spot, moving swiftly but cautiously, the borrowed time ticking away with every step. "Do you think they're tracking us?" Ryan asked, his voice hushed, his eyes darting through the shadows. "Blake's not stupid," Maya said grimly. "He'll have them fanning out, looking for any trace we leave behind. We can't afford to give him one." Ryan nodded, his movements steadier now, as if the weight of their situation was forging something stronger beneath his fear. The terrain grew steeper as they pressed deeper into the forest, the air turning colder, the trees denser. Maya's sharp eyes caught the faint outline of a structure ahead, an old cabin, its weathered frame sagging under the weight of neglect, its dark windows staring blankly into the night. "Up there," she said, pointing. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing." Ryan hesitated, his brow creasing with doubt. "What if they find us there?" he asked. "They won't," Maya replied, her voice firm with conviction. "Not if we're careful." The cabin loomed silent and eerie as they approached, its wooden walls groaning faintly in the wind. Maya pushed the door open, the hinges creaking with a sound that echoed like a warning through the stillness. Inside, the air was thick with the musty scent of damp wood and decay. The room was sparse, rickety table tilting on uneven legs, a handful of broken chairs scattered like forgotten relics, and a small fireplace choked with cold ash. It wasn't a sanctuary, but it would have to do. "We'll stay here until we can figure out our next move," Maya said, easing the door shut behind them. Ryan sank into one of the chairs, the wood creaking under his weight as exhaustion carved deep lines into his face. "Do you really think we can get out of this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya didn't answer right away. She crossed to the window, peering through the cracked glass at the endless sea of trees beyond. "We don't have a choice," she said finally, her tone resolute. "We've made it this far, we're not giving up now." Outside, the forest held its breath, but Maya knew the silence was a lie. Blake was still out there, relentless and unyielding, his pursuit fueled by a hunger for control that bordered on obsession. As Ryan drifted into a fitful rest, his shoulders slumped with the weight of the night, Maya remained by the window, her eyes locked on the darkness. Her fingers brushed the notepad in her pocket, its secrets a heavy burden she couldn't release. Blake was closing in. The question wasn't if he'd find them, but when. The hours stretched on, and Maya stayed vigilant, her gaze tracing the shifting shadows beyond the glass. Every rustle of leaves, every distant snap of a twig sent a jolt through her nerves, her body poised for the inevitable. The notepad felt like a burning coal against her skin, its contents a testament to the corruption Blake wielded like a scepter. She'd seen what he was capable of, how he twisted justice into a tool for his own gain, how he crushed anyone who dared to defy him. That power had brought them here, fleeing through the night like fugitives, but it also carried a lesson. Unchecked authority bred chaos, and the consequences would eventually turn on the one who wielded it. Blake thought he was untouchable, but Maya knew better. Every step he took toward them was a step closer to his own reckoning. Behind her, Ryan stirred, his voice cutting through the silence. "He's out there, isn't he?" he murmured, his eyes bleary but sharp with dread. Maya didn't turn from the window. "He's close," she admitted, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "But we're not going to let him win." Ryan leaned forward, running a hand through his disheveled hair, his exhaustion giving way to a flicker of resolve. "What's the plan, Maya? We can't hide here forever. If he finds us," she cut him off, her tone razor sharp. "He's not just looking for us, Ryan. He's looking for control. He wants to bury what we know, to silence us before it spreads. But that's his mistake, has underestimated what we're willing to do to stop him." The cabin creaked around them, a fragile shelter against the tide of Blake's pursuit. In that moment, the weight of their fight settled over them both, not just a scramble for survival, but a stand against the abuse of power that had set this nightmare in motion. Justice wasn't a distant ideal, it was the fire driving Maya forward. the quiet strength steadying Ryan's trembling hands. Blake's downfall wouldn't come from his strength, but from the cracks his arrogance had carved into his empire. And as the forest whispered secrets in the dark, Maya tightened her grip on the notepad, ready to turn the hunter into the hunted. In the stillness of the night, the forest stretched out like a vast, unyielding shroud, its towering trees casting long, jagged shadows across the ground. Ryan sat hunched near the cabin window, his breath fogging faintly in the dim glow of the lantern they dared not brighten. His eyes flickered with a storm of emotions. Fear gnawed at him, a cold pit in his stomach, yet beneath it burned a stubborn ember of resolve. He glanced at Maya, her silhouette sharp against the peeling wooden walls, and his voice trembled as he broke the silence. He's trampled over every onim, anyone who's ever crossed his path, but we're not giving him the satisfaction of breaking us, right? So what's our move? Maya turned to him, her dark eyes steady and unyielding, a lighthouse in the chaos threatening to swallow them whole. Her face was etched with determination, though deep within, a flicker of doubt tugged at her. Could they really outlast a man like Blake? She swallowed it down, her voice firm. We dig in and hold our ground until my team gets here. Walker's on his way with backup. Once they arrive, we'll have the numbers and the firepower to bury Blake for good and his reign once and for all. Ryan's brow furrowed, his fingers fidgeting with the frayed edge of his sleeve. And if they don't make it in time? His question hung heavy, a fragile thread of hope stretched taut between them. Maya's jaw tightened, her teeth grinding as she pictured Blake's smug face, his arrogance, his cruelty. Then we make damn sure he doesn't walk out of this forest without scars to remember us by, she replied, her words sharp as a blade, honed by a quiet fury that had been building for months. Outside, the forest had fallen into an unnatural hush. The faint chorus of crickets that had once filled the air was gone, replaced by a suffocating silence that pressed against the cabin's thin walls. Maya's instincts flared, a prickling sensation crawling up her spine. Blake was close. She could feel it, a predator circling its prey. Suddenly, a faint glimmer pierced the darkness between the trees, a ghostly flicker that made her muscles tense. Her hand drifted to her waistband, fingers brushing the cool metal of her holstered gun as she dropped low beside the window. She shot Ryan a quick, silent gesture. Stay quiet, and he obeyed, his wide eyes reflecting the growing dread that mirrored her own. The light grew stronger, slicing through the night, and with it came the crunch of boots on brittle leaves. Maya's sharp ears picked out at least 3 distinct sets of footsteps, deliberate and heavy, closing in on their fragile sanctuary. Peering through a crack in the warped shutters, she spotted the beams of flashlights cutting jagged paths through the gloom. They've found us, she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet it struck Ryan like a thunderclap. His face paled, the color draining until he looked like a ghost himself. What do we do? He hissed, his panic clawing its way to the surface. Maya's mind spun, a whirlwind of strategies and contingencies. They were outnumbered, outgunned, trapped in a rickety cabin with nowhere to run, but they weren't helpless. She knew this terrain like the back of her hand, every crevice and shadow a potential ally. Her gaze darted around the room, landing on the battered table and mismatched chairs scattered across the uneven floorboards. Help me block the door, she said, already moving with purpose. Ryan hesitated, his feet rooted to the spot as fear warred with his trust in her. Then, with a shaky breath, he sprang forward, joining her in a frantic scramble to shove the table against the door. They stacked the chairs atop it, their hands trembling but driven by a shared desperation to buy time. The footsteps outside grew louder, a relentless drumbeat echoing through the night. Muffled voices drifted through the walls, low and tense, until one cut through the rest. Blake's voice, deep and guttural, dripping with menace. She's in there, he growled, the sound sending a shiver down Ryan's spine. No one moves until I say so. Maya crouched by the window, her breath steady despite the pounding of her heart, and peered out again. She counted 3 figures, Blake at the center, flanked by 2 lackeys, their flashlights casting eerie, elongated shadows that danced across the forest floor like specters. Each man was armed, their weapons glinting faintly in the light, a stark reminder of the odds stacked against her. Blake stepped closer to the cabin, his boots crunching on the gravelly earth. his voice slicing through the stillness like a serrated edge. "Carter, I know you're in there," he taunted, his tone thick with mockery. Maya stayed silent, her fingers tightening around her gun until her knuckles whitened. Inside, she felt a surge of defiance she had spent too long running from this man, too long letting him think he held all the power. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Blake continued, his words laced with venom, scurrying off into the woods like a frightened little rabbit. "But you can't hide from me forever." Ryan crouched behind the makeshift barricade, his breathing quick and shallow, his eyes darting to Maya for reassurance. "What if they get in?" he whispered, his voice barely a thread. Maya met his gaze, her expression calm despite the storm brewing within her. "We hold them off," she said, her voice a quiet anchor in the chaos. "Blake's too arrogant, they won't move unless he's certain he's got us cornered. We turn that against him." Her mind raced with possibilities. Beck's overconfidence was a weakness, a crack in his armor they could exploit. Blake gestured to his men, his movements sharp and commanding. "Circle the cabin," he ordered. "Make sure they've got no way out." The two lackeys nodded, their faces obscured by the shadows as they split off, disappearing into the darkness like wraiths. Maya watched them go, her stomach tightening. If they surrounded the cabin, their slim chances of escape would vanish entirely. She turned to Ryan, her voice low and urgent. "We need to lure them inside. If they think we're trapped, they'll get careless." Ryan stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Lure them inside? Are you out of your mind?" His voice cracked, teetering on the edge of panic, but Maya's resolve didn't waver. "Trust me," she said, her tone firm yet laced with a quiet plea. "It's our best shot." Ryan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he nodded, though doubt still lingered in his tense frame. Moving swiftly, Maya crept to the fireplace, its hearth cold and abandoned. She scooped up a handful of ash, the gritty residue coating her fingers as she smeared it across the shutters, dulling any chance of reflection that might betray their position. Then she positioned herself in the corner, hidden in the shadows but with a clear view of the door. "Get ready," she whispered to Ryan, who gripped the edge of a chair leg like a lifeline. Outside, Blake approached the door, his flashlight beam stabbing through the cracks in the wood. "You're only making this harder on yourself, Carter," he called, his voice dripping with false patience. "You know how this ends." Maya didn't respond, her body coiled tight, every muscle primed for action. Blake's smirk widened, his patience fraying as he barked an order. "Fine, have it your way." With a sharp nod, he signaled one of his men, who stepped forward and slammed his boot against the door. The barricade shuddered, groaning under the impact, but held. A second kick followed, and the table splintered, cracks spiderwebbing across its surface. Maya steadied her aim, her breathing slow and deliberate, her focus narrowing to a pinpoint. With a final, brutal kick, the door burst inward, the barricade collapsing in a heap of broken wood and toppled chairs. The first man stepped inside, cautious but overconfident, his flashlight sweeping the room. Maya waited, her pulse a steady drumbeat in her ears, until he was fully exposed. Then she struck, darting from her hiding spot. She smashed the butt of her gun against his temple. He crumpled with a guttural grunt, his flashlight clattering across the floorboards. The second man charged in, his gun raised, but Maya was a blur of motion. She snatched the fallen flashlight and hurled it at him, the heavy metal striking his wrist and throwing off his aim. Ryan seized the moment, lunging from the side and tackling the man to the ground in a tangle of limbs and muffled curses. Then Blake appeared in the doorway, his gun drawn, his face twisted into a mask of raw fury as he surveyed the chaos. "Enough," he roared, his voice a thunderclap that shook the cabin. Maya spun to face him, her gun leveled at his chest, her hands steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "Drop it, Blake," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a whip. Blake's smirk returned, cold and defiant, his gun unwavering. "You think you've won, Carter? You're outnumbered. You can't win this." Her grip tightened, her eyes blazing with a fire born of months of pent-up rage. "This isn't about winning," she shot back. "It's about justice. You've abused your power, crushed anyone who stood in your way, but that ends tonight. You're done hiding behind your threats." Blake's finger twitched on the trigger, his smirk faltering for a fraction of a second but before he could act. The distant wail of sirens pierced the night. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blake's face. His gaze darted to the window, where flashes of red and blue pulsed through the trees, growing brighter with every second. The sirens swelled, a chorus of retribution closing in, and his remaining ally bolted from the cabin, vanishing into the forest's embrace. Blake stood frozen, his chest heaving, his expression a volatile mix of rage and desperation. "It's over, Blake," Maya said, her voice steady as steel. "Give it up." For a fleeting moment, surrender seemed possible. His shoulders slumped, his gun wavered. But then, with a snarl, he lunged at her, his movements wild and unhinged. Maya reacted instinctively, sidestepping his attack and twisting his arm in a fluid motion. His gun clattered to the floor, and he hit the ground hard, the air rushing from his lungs. She planted her boot on his back, pinning him as he thrashed beneath her. The cabin door burst open again, and a flood of FBI agents stormed in, their weapons drawn, their shouts slicing through the chaos. "Agent Carter," Walker's voice rose above the din, sharp and commanding. "Here," Maya called back, stepping away as two agents hauled Blake to his feet, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Walker approached, his weathered face softening with relief, though his eyes held a glint of admiration. "You okay?" Maya nodded, her body still humming with adrenaline, her mind racing with the weight of what had just unfolded. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady but edged with exhaustion. "But Blake's got a reckoning. Cummings got a lot to answer for." As the agents dragged him out, Blake's gaze locked onto hers, his lips curling into a twisted, venomous smile. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice low and dripping with malice. "You think you've won, but you don't even know what you're up against." His words sank into her like claws, stirring a chill she couldn't shake. She held his stare, unflinching, but inside, a seed of unease took root. Blake wasn't bluffing. There was something deeper, something darker lurking beneath his threats, a web of secrets she hadn't yet unraveled. She turned to Walker, her tone urgent. "This is bigger than Blake. We need to move fast before whatever he's hiding slips away." Walker nodded, his expression grim, lines of worry etching deeper into his face. "Blake won't go quietly. He'll drag someone down with him if he can. You're his target now, Carter." Maya's resolve hardened, a steel wall rising within her. This wasn't just a fight for truth anymore. It was a race against a man who'd lost everything, but still clung to his power like a drowning man to driftwood. She knew he wasn't done playing his hand, and she'd be damned if she let him win. As the hum of the FBI transport van rumbled through the night, Maya sat across from Walker, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Outside, the forest lay still, its secrets buried in the shadows, but inside, her thoughts churned like a storm. Blake was in custody, his threats still ringing in her ears. That twisted grin seared into her memory. "This isn't over," he'd said, and she knew he meant it. Whatever he was hiding, it was big enough to keep him defiant even now. Walker leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "We've got him locked up, but you're right, this doesn't feel finished." He's too calm for a man facing the end. Maya's eyes narrowed, her mind sifting through every detail, every word Blake had spat at her. "He's not bluffing," she said, her tone sharp with conviction. "Whatever he's got up his sleeve, he thinks it's enough to turn this around. We need to dig deeper. Find what he's so desperate to protect." Walker studied her, his gaze heavy with unspoken concern. "I've got a team tearing through his precinct records already, looking for anything off. But if he's as dirty as you think, he'll have buried it deep." Maya pulled a battered notepad from her jacket, flipping through pages scribbled with frantic notice names, dates, fragments of leads she'd pieced together over months. "It's more than corruption," she said, her voice low and fierce. "I can feel it. He's tangled in something massive, and whatever it is, it's the key to breaking him." Walker's lips pressed into a thin line, but he nodded. "You've got a nose for this, Carter. What do you need from me?" Maya met his gaze, her determination burning bright. "Time, resources, and a team I can trust. We're not just taking him down, we're dismantling everything he's built. And we're doing it before he gets the chance to strike back." In that moment, the lesson crystallized for her. Justice wasn't just about catching the guilty, it was about stripping away the power they wielded to harm others. Blake had abused his authority, leaving a trail of broken lives in his wake. But his downfall would be a testament to the consequences of that arrogance. For Maya, this fight was personal. A vow to ensure no one else suffered under his shadow, and she'd chase that truth to the ends of the earth if she had to. The moment the truth about Blake's corruption sank in, Maya's resolve hardened like steel. She didn't pause to second-guess herself or linger on the weight of what she was about to unravel. "I need a full investigative team on Blake's precinct," she declared, her voice steady and commanding as she faced Walker in the dimly lit corner of the FBI operations room. "Focus on his inner circle, those officers he kept closest. There's no chance he pulled this off alone. And get me every case file he's ever touched. Somewhere in that mess, we'll find the thread that ties it all together." Her words carried an urgency born from years of chasing shadows, and now, with the prey finally in sight, she could feel the pulse of the hunt quickening in her veins. Walker, ever the loyal partner, gave a sharp nod, his hazel eyes reflecting a quiet faith in her instincts. He'd seen Maya like this before in Yelding, a force of nature when she latched onto a lead, but this time, there was something deeper, a personal edge to her determination that made him both proud and uneasy. "It's done," he said, his tone firm yet tinged with caution. "But Maya, tread carefully. Blake may be locked up, but men like him don't just fade away. They claw their way back, and they don't care who gets shredded in the process." His warning hung in the air, a somber reminder of the stakes, but Maya barely acknowledged it. She was already moving, her mind racing ahead to the evidence waiting for her. Back at FBI headquarters, the air buzzed with tension as agents shuffled through stacks of paperwork and flickering computer screens. Maya dove into the chaos head first, her desk quickly becoming a war zone of scattered files and half-empty coffee cups. The team had hauled in everything they could from Blake's precinct cases he'd overseen, arrests he'd orchestrated, even disciplinary reports that had mysteriously vanished from official records, only to resurface now like ghosts of his misdeeds. She worked with a precision that bordered on obsession, her fingers tracing names and dates, her brow furrowed as she pieced together a puzzle that had eluded her for too long. Every document was a glimpse into Blake's world, a world she'd once trusted, now revealed as a house of lies. One name kept rising to the surface like oil on water: Marcus Holloway, a drug trafficker with a rap sheet as long as the highways he used to smuggle his poison. Holloway wasn't just some petty crook. He was a linchpin, tied to the very cartel Maya had been hunting for months before Blake's interference had thrown her off the scent. She could still feel the sting of that betrayal, the way he'd smiled at her across precinct briefings while secretly dismantling her work. "Walker," she called out, her voice cutting through the hum of the room as she waved him over, her pulse quickening with the thrill of discovery. He hurried to her side, leaning over her cluttered desk with a mix of curiosity and concern. "What have you got?" he asked, his broad shoulders casting a shadow over the files. Maya tapped a finger on a stack of arrest reports, her eyes alight with the fire of realization. "Blake's connection to Marcus Holloway. It's not obvious at first, you have to dig for it, but it's there, woven into every arrest, every dropped charge. Whenever Holloway got picked up, Blake was in the picture, pulling strings to let him slip away. Reduced sentences, evidence gone missing, it's all too clean to be coincidence." Walker's frown deepened, the lines on his weathered face etching a map of worry. Sounds like Blake wasn't just turning a blind eye, he was shielding him. More than that, Maya shot back, her voice rising with conviction. "Holloway's no small-time thug. He's got ties to the cartel we've been chasing, same one Blake sabotaged me on. This wasn't just protection. Blake was profiting from it, getting his cut while Holloway kept the operation humming. It's a partnership, Walker, and it's been right under our noses." Walker straightened, his mind already racing through the implications. "If we can nail that down, prove Blake's been on the take, we've got him dead to rights. What's our next step?" "We drag Holloway in," Maya said without hesitation, her jaw set with determination. "Blake's dangerous, sure, but Holloway's the key. Crack him, and this whole rotten empire comes crashing down." She could almost see its dominoes falling, the web of corruption unraveling thread by thread. Justice wasn't just a goal now, it was a promise she intended to keep. Meanwhile, across town in the detention center, Blake sat motionless in his holding cell. A king stripped of his crown, but far from defeated. The gray walls loomed around him, cold and unyielding, but they couldn't cage the sharpness in his gaze. His badge was gone, his authority stripped away. Yet the air around him crackled with a quiet menace. An officer approached, a young rookie with nervous hands, sliding a tray of lukewarm food through the slot in the bars. "Dinner time," the kid muttered, avoiding Blake's eyes. Blake didn't even glance at the tray. Instead, he leaned back against the wall, the concrete chilling his spine as his thoughts drifted far beyond the present moment. He wasn't here, not really. His mind was out there, calculating, plotting, reaching for the strings he could still pull. Footsteps echoed down the sterile hallway, deliberate and measured, and a figure emerged from the shadows. Blake's lawyer, Carter Hensley, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed money and arrogance. Carter carried himself with the swagger of a man who'd danced with the devil and come out grinning. Well, he said, his voice smooth as silk and laced with faint amusement. "You've really stepped in it this time, haven't you?" Blake's lips curled into a smirk, slow and deliberate, the kind that made lesser men squirm. "A mess? No, Carter. This isn't a mess. It's a hiccup, a temporary inconvenience. I'm not planning to rot in here, and you know it." Carter arched a brow, leaning casually against the bars as if they were discussing the weather. "You'd better have an ace up your sleeve then, because the FBI's got you boxed in tight. Agent Carter Maya thinks she's got the upper hand." Blake's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing to slits as he leaned forward, the chains on his wrists clinking softly. "Maya thinks she's clever, doesn't she? Thinks she's ahead of me. But she has no idea how deep this rabbit hole goes. By the time she figures it out, I'll be long gone, and she'll be choking on the dust I leave behind." His voice was low, a growl of defiance, and beneath it simmered a lesson he'd learned long ago. Power wasn't given, it was taken, and he'd claw it back no matter the cost. The next morning broke with a storm of action. Maya and Walker led a raid on Holloway's hideout, a crumbling warehouse on the edge of the city where the air stank of diesel and desperation. The team moved like a well-oiled machine, boots pounding against cracked concrete as they burst through rusted doors. Shouts filled the air, sharp and chaotic. But Holloway didn't even have time to reach for the gun stashed under his desk before agents had him pinned, his face pressed against the grimy floor. Maya watched from the sidelines, her heart pounding not with fear, but with the fierce satisfaction of a hunter, closing in on her quarry. Hours later, Holloway sat in the interrogation room, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his broad frame slouched in a metal chair that creaked under his weight. His face was a mask of defiance, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as Maya studied him through the two-way mirror. She could feel the gears turning in her head, mapping out every angle, every pressure point. "Think he'll talk?" Walker asked, his voice a low rumble beside her. "He will," Maya replied, her confidence unshakable. Men like Holloway build their whole lives on the illusion they're untouchable. Strip that away, and they crumble. "We've got the leverage to make it happen." She pushed open the door and stepped inside, the click of her boots on the tile echoing like a countdown. Holloway didn't look up at first, his gaze fixed on the scratched tabletop as if it held some secret he could wield against her. "Marcus Holloway," Maya began, her tone calm but edged with steel as she slid into the chair across from him. "We know about your little arrangement with Officer Blake." He snorted, a harsh, dismissive sound, but his eyes flicked up to meet hers for a split second. "Never heard of him." Maya raised an eyebrow, unfazed, and slid a thick file across the table, letting it land with a dull thud. "Funny, because I've got a pile of evidence here that says otherwise. Every time you got hauled in drug busts, trafficking charges, Blake was there. Like your personal guardian angel. Charges dropped, witnesses vanished, paperwork lost. You walked free every single time. Coincidence?" Holloway shifted in his seat, his bravado wavering as he glanced at the file, then away. "You can't prove a damn thing," he muttered, but the words lacked bite. "Can't I?" Maya leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper, intimate and cutting. "Blake's in a cell now, Marcus. He's not riding to your rescue this time. And when he gets out, if he gets out, I think he's going to stick his neck out for you. You're a loose end, and men like Blake don't keep loose ends around. But if you talk, if you give us what we need, I can offer you a way out. Witness protection. A lighter sentence, something to keep you breathing when the cartel comes looking. Holloway's jaw tightened, his fingers twitching against his arm as the weight of her words sank in. She could see a war raging behind his eyes, the fear of betrayal clashing with the instinct to save his own skin. You've got nothing on me, he said at last, but his voice cracked, a hairline fracture in his crumbling facade. Maya leaned back, a faint smile tugging at her lips. We'll see about that. But here's something to chew on. If we take you down, the cartel won't be far behind. They don't like liabilities any more than Blake does. Helping us might be the only thing that keeps you alive. She let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating, watching as doubt carved deeper lines into his face. In the observation room, Walker stood with his arms folded, his gaze locked on the exchange. She's got him pinned, he said to the agent beside him, a weary young man named Daniels who'd been shadowing the case. He's teetering. Daniels nodded, his sharp eyes glinting with a mix of admiration and nerves. Let's hope he cracks before Blake pulls his next card. That guy's not going down without a fight. Is probably already scheming from that cell. Walker's expression darkened, his thoughts drifting to the man they'd underestimated for too long. Blake's not just fighting, he's plotting. We've got to stay one step ahead, or he'll burn us all before we even see the flames. As Maya stepped out of the interrogation room, her phone buzzed sharply in her pocket. Jolting her from her focus, she glanced at the screen. Walker again. Problem, the message read. Blake's lawyer is filing a motion for release. Hearings tomorrow morning. Her grip tightened until her knuckles whitened, a surge of frustration boiling in her chest. She swore under her breath, her strides lengthening as she stormed back to the operations room. Blake was making his move, slipping through the cracks of the system like the snake he was. Walker was waiting, his face etched with the same grim resolve she felt. Files were strewn across the table, a chaotic testament to their dwindling time. Unlawful detention, Maya snapped, tossing her phone onto the pile. He's gaming the system. What's their play? Walker didn't look up from the documents, his voice tight. They're arguing we had no probable cause, saying the arrest wasn't tied directly to his precinct corruption or Holloway's operation. It's flimsy, but they're betting on it stalling us, maybe even convincing a judge who owes a favor. Maya paced, her boots scuffing the floor as her mind raced. We've got enough to bury him, his history, the patterns, the timeline with Holloway. How is that not enough? It's circumstantial, Walker said, finally meeting her gaze. Until Holloway talks, or we dig up concrete proof, money trails, cartel orders, it's a house of cards. And Blake's lawyer knows how to blow it down. She slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. If he walks tomorrow, it's over. He'll vanish, tie up every loose end we haven't found, and then he'll come for us. We can't let that happen. Walker nodded, his resolve mirroring hers. Then we double down. Less than a day to make this ironclad. I'll get a team on his financial wire transfers, payoffs, anything that leaves a trail. You handle Holloway. Done, Maya said, her voice a blade. He's hiding something, and I'm not letting him stall until Blake slips free. She turned on her heel, the fire in her chest burning hotter with every step back to the interrogation room. Holloway was still there, slouched and simmering, his earlier swagger dulled by the hours of isolation. He smirked when she walked in, but it was a hollow gesture, a mask slipping off a man who knew the walls were closing in. Back already, he drawled, though his eyes betrayed his fatigue. Maya didn't bother with niceties. She dropped a new file in front of him, thicker this time, and flipped it open to reveal a cascade of damning evidence, grainy surveillance photos, bank statements with circled transactions, reports tying him to Blake's precinct. You think you're untouchable, Marcus? She asked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Look at this. Years of protection from a dirty cop, and now that cop's locked up, and you're dangling out here alone. Blake's not coming for you. He's cutting you loose the second he can, because you're a liability he can't afford. Holloway leaned back, but his eyes darted to the file, lingering on a photo of him shaking hands with a known cartel enforcer. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, the first real sign of fear breaking through. "You're bluffing," he said, but the words trembled. "Am I?" Maya pressed, leaning in close enough to see the sweat beading on his brow. "Blake's going to pin this on someone, and it sure as hell won't be himself. You want to be the fall guy, because that's where this is headed unless you start talking. Tell us what you know about Blake, the cartel, the payoffs, and I can shield you. Witness protection, a deal to keep you out of the grave. Stay silent, and you're on your own when they come for you." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension as Holloway stared at her. His jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might shatter. His fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on the table, a telltale sign of the storm raging inside him, fear of the cartel, distrust of Blake, the slim hope of survival dangling just out of reach. Maya watched it all play out on his face, the slow unraveling of a man who'd built his life on power only to see it crumble under the weight of its own corruption. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a reckoning. Blake had abused his authority, twisted justice into a tool for his own gain, and now the consequences were clawing their way to the surface. For Maya, every step forward was a lesson carved in stone. Power unchecked was a poison, and she'd be damned if she let it spread any further. The air in the dimly lit room was thick with tension as Maya leaned forward, her voice trembling with a mix of defiance and desperation. "All right, I'll talk," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. "But I want guarantees, ironclad promises that you'll take them down." Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto the figure across from her, searching for any hint of betrayal. She could feel her pulse hammering in her chest, a wild rhythm fueled by the stakes of what she was about to reveal. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about justice, about dismantling the rotten core of a system she'd once trusted. Meanwhile, miles away at the detention center, Blake lounged in his cell with an air of unsettling calm. The stark fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting jagged shadows across the concrete walls. His lawyer sat opposite him, a briefcase open on the narrow table between them, papers meticulously ranged like pieces in a chess game. Blake's lips curled into a sly, almost serpentine smile as he listened to the strategy unfolding before him. "The motion we've filed is airtight," the lawyer said, his tone brimming with confidence, adjusting his glasses as he leaned closer. "Even if the judge doesn't rule in our favor tomorrow, it'll plant enough seeds of doubt to throw their investigation into chaos. They're running around like headless chickens right now, and the longer we can drag this out, the more it works in our favor." Blake tilted his head back against the wall, his smirk stretching wider, a glint of triumph flickering in his cold eyes. "Good," he murmured, his voice smooth and deliberate. "They think they've got me pinned, but they have no idea how far this web stretches." The lawyer's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of caution crossing his face as he lowered his voice. "Just keep in mind, if they dig up anything solid, like financial trails, recordings, or any thread tying you to the cartel, it's over. No motion will save you then." Blake's gaze hardened, his smirk fading into something darker, more menacing. "They won't," he replied, his tone icy and absolute. "I've covered my tracks too well. But if they start sniffing too close," he let the sentence hang in the air, his fingers drumming lightly on the table, a silent promise of retribution. "I've got plans in place. Carter thinks she's untouchable, sitting up there on her high horse, but she's clueless about the storm she's walking into." At that same moment, across town, the weight of a bombshell confession crashed down on Maya like a tidal wave. Hallow, a weary man with haunted eyes and a voice roughened by years of hard living, had just spilled everything. Sitting in a cramped interrogation room, his hands fidgeting nervously with the edge of his sleeve, he recounted how Blakey, a decorated officer, had been his shield, providing protection for his shady dealings in exchange for thick envelopes of cash. Hallow's words painted a vivid picture: late-night handoffs in deserted parking lots, coded messages scrawled on napkins, and a hidden storage unit on the city's edge where he'd delivered payments, cash, luxury watches, even a rare bottle of bourbon once over the years. Maya's adrenaline spiked as she processed the details, her mind racing with the implications. She grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed Walker. "We've got him," she said, her voice tight with urgency. barely able to contain the surge of hope and fear battling within her. "Hallow just handed us the key. If that storage unit holds what he says it does, records, cache, anything linking Blake to the Cartlets' checkmate." Walker, a broad-shouldered man with a perpetual frown etched into his weathered face, didn't hesitate. "I'll get a warrant," he replied, his tone clipped and decisive. "We're hitting it tonight." The storage facility was a nondescript cluster of low buildings on the outskirts of the city, shrouded in the kind of quiet that felt deliberate, almost oppressive. Maya and Walker led a small team, their unmarked SUVs rolling into the lot under a moonless sky, tires crunching softly against gravel. Maya's heart thundered in her chest as they approached Unit 17, her breath catching in her throat. If Hallow was telling the truth and every instinct screamed that this could be the moment that not only nailed Blake, but exposed the full depth of his corruption, a festering wound in the justice system she'd sworn to uphold. With the warrant clutched in Walker's hand, they pried open the lock, the metal screeching in protest as the door rolled up. Inside, the small space was a treasure trove of secrets, illuminated by a single flickering bulb dangling from the ceiling. Boxes were stacked haphazardly along the walls, filing cabinets stood like silent sentinels, and unmarked envelopes littered a rickety table. Walker let out a low whistle, his eyes widening as he took it all in. "This is a damn gold mine," he muttered, stepping inside. Maya followed, her sharp gaze darting across the cluttered room. She yanked open a filing cabinet, her fingers brushing against folders stuffed with financial records, ledgers of transactions, dates, and amounts that tied Blake to shadowy figures. She flipped through surveillance photos showing him shaking hands with known cartel members, his face smug and unrepentant, holding up a stack of papers. Her voice trembled with a mix of disbelief and vindication. "This is it, proof of payouts, meetings, even tampered case files." Blake wasn't just covering for Hallow. He was neck-deep in this. Walker's jaw tightened, his expression grim as he nodded. "Let's get this back to HQ. His lawyers got no silver tongue strong enough to wiggle out of this." As they loaded the evidence into their vehicles, Maya's phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a message from an agent at the detention center. Blake's acting strange, might be planning something. Her stomach twisted into knots, a cold dread seeping into her bones. "Walker," she said, her voice urgent, "we need to move fast. Blake's got a backup plan brewing." Walker's eyes met hers, steady but laced with concern. "Let's end this," he said firmly, and the convoy peeled out, racing back toward headquarters through the sleeping city. Minutes later, Maya's phone buzzed again, the single word urgent flashing across the screen. Her pulse quickened as she opened Walker's follow-up message. "Blake's made contact with someone outside. We don't know who yet, but it's big." Her grip tightened on the phone, her knuckles whitening as her mind spun. If Blake was reaching out now, it wasn't to wave a white flag, was doubling down, playing a hand she hadn't anticipated. Whoever he'd contacted could be the trump card that turned this deadly game in his favor. The FBI convoy sliced through the city streets, headlights piercing the darkness like knives. As Maya's thoughts churned, this wasn't a panicked move. It was calculated, deliberate, and her gut told her it tied back to the cartel. "Walker," she called over the radio, her voice taut with resolve. "What do we know about this contact?" His reply crackled through the speakers, heavy with implication. "Not much yet, just a quick call, a few seconds long, traced to a burner phone. But here's the kicker. That number is already on our radar, linked to cartel activity." Maya's stomach plummeted, a sickening realization settling in. "You're saying Blake's still got live wires to them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's exactly what I'm saying," Walker shot back, his tone dark. "He's not just trying to save his skin, he's setting something big in motion." Back at the detention center, Blake sat perched on the edge of his cot, the hum of the lights above him a faint, irritating drone. The officer stationed outside his cell watched him through the reinforced glass, unease prickling at the back of his neck. Blake was too composed, too still, like a predator lying in wait. In his hand, he toyed with a thin strip of paper that had been slipped into his meal tray earlier that evening. Its message scrawled in blocky, uneven letters, "Stand by, help is coming." A slow, smug grin spread across his face as he tucked the note into his sleeve. This wasn't just a lifeline, it was a guarantee, a whisper of the power he still wielded. Even from behind bars, at headquarters, Maya and Walker burst through the doors, the evidence from the storage unit cradled in their arms like a ticking bomb. The team was already in overdrive, agents hunched over desks, sifting through files and piecing together the sprawling puzzle of Blake's crime-mesh's ties to Hallow, the cartel, and a network of corruption that ran deeper than anyone had imagined. But Maya's mind was elsewhere, gnawed by the growing certainty that Blake's next move was already in play. "We need to figure out who he called," she said, pacing the room, her boots clicking against the linoleum. "And we need to do it now." An agent at a nearby desk shot up his hand, his voice cutting through the hum of activity. "Agent Carter, we've got something." The burner phone number, it's tied to a warehouse by the docks, a known cartel hotspot. Maya's eyes narrowed, her resolve hardening like steel. "Get me a team," she ordered. "We're going there now." Walker stepped forward, his brow furrowing with concern. "Maya, are you sure? We've already got enough to bury Blake. This could be a trap." She met his gaze, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Maybe it is, but if he's pulling strings from that cell, this is our shot to cut him off before it spirals. If the cartel's in play, we can't wait." Walker studied her for a beat, then nodded. "I'll grab a tactical unit. We roll out in 10. The convoy reached the docks just past midnight, the air heavy with the briny tang of the sea and the sharp bite of diesel fumes. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted metal walls glinting faintly under the glow of distant floodlights. Maya stepped out of the SUV, her senses on high alert as she scanned the eerily silent surroundings. "Stay sharp," she whispered, her voice low but carrying the weight of command. The team moved in tight formation, weapons drawn, shadows stretching long and thin across the cracked pavement. Walker took point, easing the warehouse door open with a soft creak, revealing a cavernous interior lined with towering shipping containers. The air inside was thick with dust and the metallic scent of rust, the dim overhead lights casting a sickly yellow glow. "Clear the area," Walker ordered, his voice steady as the agents fanned out, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. Maya moved cautiously, her flashlight slicing through the gloom, her heart pounding with every step. "Anything?" she called out, her voice taut with anticipation. "Nothing yet," an agent replied, but then her beam caught something, an open container near the far wall, its door swaying slightly in the draft, a single bulb flickering inside. She approached, her weapon raised, her breath hitching as she peered in. The sight hit her like a punch, a table strewn with papers, a humming laptop, and a burner phone identical to the one Blake had used. Worse, there were photos pinned to the wall, grainy shots of her, Walker, and other agents. Their movements tracked. "It's a surveillance hub," she said, her voice tight with fury and fear. Walker joined her, his face darkening as he took it in. "They've been watching us." Before she could process it further, a deafening bang shattered the silence, followed by the rapid thud of boots on concrete. "Contact!" an agent shouted, and gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks bouncing off the metal walls like a deadly symphony. Maya dove behind the container, her pulse roaring in her ears as she returned fire, her shots precise and controlled. From the shadows, a group of masked men emerged, their movements fluid and disciplined, bullets tearing through the air with lethal intent. "Ambush!" Walker bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos as he laid down cover fire. The FBI team scrambled for cover, retreating behind a row of containers, their training kicking in despite the sudden onslaught. Maya's mind raced as she reloaded, her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. This wasn't a last-ditch effort, it was a meticulously planned strike, and Blake's influence pulsed through every second of it. Back at the detention center, he reclined on his cot, his smug grin unshaken, the faint hum of the lights above him a mocking soundtrack to his confidence. He'd played his hand, and as the echoes of gunfire faded into the night, it was clear the game was far from over, just more dangerous than ever. The lesson here stretched beyond the immediate clash. Justice wasn't a straight line, but a jagged, treacherous path. Blake's abuse of power, his willingness to twist the system for his gain, hadn't just endangered lives. It had eroded trust in the very institutions meant to protect. Every bullet fired in that warehouse was a consequence, a ripple of his arrogance. And Maya knew that stopping him wasn't just about winning it, was about reclaiming what he'd corrupted. The distant clamor of chaos reverberated through the night air, echoing from the docks where every shout, every gunshot, seemed to ripple toward Blake with a strange sense of satisfaction. He stood in the shadowed corner of his cell, his posture loose, almost leisurely, as if the world beyond those iron bars wasn't erupting into flames he'd carefully stoked. The officer stationed outside his cell, a young man with sweat beading on his brow and a nervous twitch in his finger, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward Blake. "You're awfully calm," the officer muttered, his voice tinged with unease. "For someone who's about to lose it all." Blake's lips curled into a slow, deliberate chuckle, the sound low and rough, like gravel crunching underfoot. He tilted his head, meeting the officer's gaze with an intensity that made the younger man flinch. "Lose," Blake said, his tone dripping with mockery. "You think this is some petty game with a scoreboard? No, kid, this isn't about winning or losing. By the time this is over, Carter, that self-righteous thorn in my side, will be begging for mercy she'll never get." Meanwhile, across the city, the warehouse was a battlefield ablaze with desperation and fury. The sharp crack of gunfire split the air as FBI agent Maya Carter crouched behind a stack of splintered crates, her breath fogging in the cold. Her fingers tightened around her weapon, steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. She peeked out, her sharp eyes locking onto one of the masked assailants, a weary figure darting between shadows. With a single, precise shot, she sent him sprawling to the ground, his weapon skittering across the concrete. Beside her, Agent Walker barked orders into his comms, his voice a steady anchor amidst the storm. "Hold the line, push them back," he shouted, his broad shoulders hunched as he directed the team with the precision of a seasoned tactician. The attacker-shired muscle for the cartel no doubt began to falter, their movements growing erratic as the FBI's relentless pressure closed in. Maya surged forward, her voice cutting through the din. "Move up, they're breaking," she yelled, signaling to the agents behind her. The tide turned swiftly. Within minutes, the warehouse fell into an eerie stillness, the last echoes of gunfire fading into the night. A few of the masked men lay groaning on the floor. Others had vanished into the darkness, their retreat a frantic scramble for survival. Maya lowered her weapon, her chest heaving as she scanned the scene. The surveillance equipment they'd fought to protect stood intact, its blinking lights a silent testament to their victory. Several of the attackers were slumped in handcuffs, their masks ripped away to reveal faces hardened by years of crime. Walker approached, his boots thudding against the concrete, his expression a storm cloud of frustration and resolve. "We've got enough here to pin this on the cartel," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "But it's still not enough to tie it back to Blake." Maya's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger simmering beneath her exhaustion. "Then we don't stop," she replied, her tone resolute. "This was just the opening act. Whatever Blake's cooking up, he's nowhere near finished." As they prepared to leave, her phone buzzed sharply against her hip. She pulled it out, her eyes narrowing at the message. Blake's lawyer just filed for an emergency hearing. He could walk free tomorrow. Her fingers clenched around the device, the plastic creaking under her grip. The firefight at the docks might have ended, but a new war loomed on the horizon, fought not with bullets, but with words and evidence in a courtroom. Blake wasn't just trying to slip out of custody. He was aiming to dismantle everything she'd sworn to protect. The next morning, the courtroom hummed with anticipation, a beehive of whispered conversations and the restless tapping of polished shoes against gleaming floors. Reporters crowded the back rows, their cameras poised like vultures circling a fresh kill, eager to capture every twist in the saga of Officer Blake. Maya sat at the prosecution table, her posture rigid, her dark eyes fixed on Blake's defense attorney, a sleek, silver-haired man in a tailored suit who radiated unshakable confidence. Blake sat beside him, his hands folded casually in his lap, his face a mask of calm that bordered on arrogance. She could feel the weight of his gaze, a silent taunt that set her nerves on edge. Walker leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. "Judge Hargreaves a stickler for the rules," he murmured. "Blake's lawyer will pull every dirty trick in the book to sway him." Maya's lips pressed into a thin line, her voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. "I don't care about tricks. We've got the evidence, and I'll be damned if I let him walk out of here." The judge entered, his black robe billowing slightly as he took his seat, and the room fell into a hushed reverence. "This court is now in session," he announced, his voice deep and authoritative. "We're here to address Officer Blake's motion for release, citing unlawful detention. Counsel, you may proceed." Blake's attorney rose smoothly, his movements polished, his tone dripping with calculated charm. "Your Honor," he began, "my client, a decorated officer with a stellar record, has been unjustly detained without a shred of concrete evidence tying him to any wrongdoing. These charges are a flimsy house of cards, built on speculation and desperation. The FBI's pursuit of him is nothing less than a witch hunt, an attempt to smear a man who has served this city honorably for years." Maya's fingers twitched against the table, her restraint fraying as she fought the urge to leap up and counter his lies. She forced herself to wait, knowing the strength of her case lay in the cold, hard facts she'd painstakingly gathered. When the attorney finished his performance, Judge Hargrove turned his stern gaze to Maya. "Agent Carter, the burden of proof rests with you. Make your case." She stood, clutching a thick folder of evidence, her heart pounding but her voice unwavering. "Your Honor, Officer Blake's detention is far from speculative. It's grounded in irrefutable evidence of corruption, obstruction of justice, and deep ties to a notorious drug cartel. Allow me to walk you through it." She approached the bench, her steps measured, her tone methodical yet charged with conviction. "Exhibit A, financial records recovered from a hidden storage unit, directly linked to Blake. These documents reveal a steady stream of unexplained income payments that align perfectly with known cartel transactions." She handed the files to the clerk, her eyes never leaving the judge. "Exhibit B, testimony from Marcus Holloway, a cartel operative who has confessed to personally delivering cash to Blake in exchange for protection and interference in federal investigations." The defense attorney shot to his feet, his voice sharp. "Objection, Your Honor. Holloway is a convicted felon with every reason to lie for a lighter sentence. His word is unreliable." Judge Hargrove raised a hand, his expression impassive. "Objection noted. Proceed, Agent Carter." Maya nodded, undeterred. "Exhibit C, surveillance logs from a cartel-run warehouse, detailing FBI movements and communications intercepted under Blake's explicit direction. These records include specific instances where he sabotaged our investigations." She gestured toward the back of the room, where agents wheeled in heavy boxes brimming with files and devices. "Everything here corroborates our case. Blake isn't a hero, he's a traitor who's sold out his badge for blood money." For the first time, a crack appeared in Blake's smug facade. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering fiercely, his eyes flashing with something dangerous. Maya caught his stare and held it, her resolve hardening like steel. But the defense attorney wasn't finished. He stood again, his tone slick and dismissive. "Your Honor, these so-called records were obtained under dubious circumstance. The chain of custody is shaky at best, and Holloway's testimony, the desperate ramblings of a criminal trying to save his own skin. This is the FBI clutching at straws to mask their own incompetence." Maya stepped forward, her voice slicing through the room like a blade. "The defense is dodging the truth, Your Honor. The evidence is clear, overwhelming, and it speaks louder than their excuses." Judge Hargrove interjected, his brow furrowing. "Agent Carter, you've laid out a strong case, but I need something definitive. Is there direct evidence linking Blake to these acts?" Maya hesitated, her mind racing. Corruption cases were a maze of shadows, direct proof often elusive. Then it hit her burner phone. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steadying, "we recently recovered a burner phone used by the cartel to contact Blake. Its logs show active communication with him, even while he's been in custody." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, a ripple of shock spreading through the crowd. Maya pressed on, her momentum building. "This isn't ancient history. Blake is running operations from behind bars, leveraging the same network that's shielded him for years. He's not just a threat, a live wire." The defense attorney stood, his polish fraying at the edges. "Your Honor, These are wild claims until that phone's data is fully verified. I request a delay for forensic analysis. Maya cut in, her tone urgent. A delay only gives Blake time to pull more strings. We've already thwarted a cartel ambush tied directly to him. He's a danger to the public, and he needs to stay locked up. Judge Hargrove tapped his pen against the desk, his eyes narrowing as he weighed the arguments. Court is in recess, he declared. I'll review the evidence and rule in 1 hour. As the room cleared, Maya and Walker slipped into a quiet corner, the tension between them palpable. Walker rubbed his jaw, his voice tight. That was too damn close. Maya nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she shoved them into her pockets. If the judge lets him go, we're done. He'll vanish, and we'll never touch him again. Walker placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. We've thrown everything at this. It's out of our hands now. An hour later, the courtroom filled again, the air thick with anticipation. Judge Hargrove returned, his face unreadable. After careful review, he began, I find the FBI's evidence, financial records, testimony, and phone logs establishes probable cause. The motion for release is denied. Relief flooded Maya, a wave of cool air against the heat of her nerves, but it was fleeting. Blake's eyes met hers across the room, his lips twisting into a faint, chilling smile. She knew that look. This wasn't over. Back at headquarters, Maya and Walker spread out across a cluttered table, sifting through the fallout of the hearing. With Blake's detention secured, they could finally breathe a bit, only for a moment. Walker slid a stack of fresh documents toward her, his voice grim. Holloway's still talking. This web's bigger than we thought. Blake wasn't just a shield for the cartel, he was a cog in their machine. Maya's eyes narrowed, her fingers tracing the edges of the papers. And he's got friends out there still. We need to root them out before they regroup. Walker nodded, already reaching for his phone. I'll get the field teams on the warehouse leads. As he stepped away, Maya sank into her chair, her mind spinning. That smile Blake had flashed in the courtroom gnawed at her, a splinter she couldn't dislodge. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to reality. An anonymous message glowed on the screen. You think you've won, but you've only peeked at the edge of the abyss. Her grip tightened, her knuckles whitening. Blake's influence stretched further than she'd feared, his network a living, breathing beast. She'd scored a win today, but the lesson was clear. Justice was a fragile thing, easily shattered by those who wielded power without conscience. Blake's corruption wasn't just a betrayal of his badge, it was a warning. Abuse power, and the consequences ripple far beyond the guilty, threatening everything in their path. Maya steeled herself. The fight was far from finished, and she'd be ready for whatever came next. The air hung thick with tension, a palpable weight pressing down on everyone involved as the operation unfolded in shadows and whispers. For Maya, it wasn't just another mission, it was personal now. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a thunderous reminder of the stakes at hand. She had uncovered something rotten, a sprawling web of corruption that snaked its way through the very system she'd once trusted. That discovery had turned her into their next target, a marked woman with a fire blazing in her soul. She wasn't the type to cower, though. Her unyielding determination had become her shield, her weapon, her everything. Every step she took was deliberate, her jaw set tight, eyes sharp with a resolve that could cut through steel. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, Ash was standing up for something bigger, a justice that had been trampled under the boots of greed and power. The city around her buzzed with its usual chaos, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath its surface. Neon lights flickered over rain-slicked streets, casting long, jagged reflections that danced like specters in the night. Maya moved through it all with a predator's grace, her coat flapping in the wind as she ducked into an alley, her breath fogging in the cold. She could feel them watching Blake's people, his network of loyal dogs who thrived in the dark corners of this urban sprawl. They weren't faceless to her anymore. She'd memorized their habits, their smirks, the way they carried themselves with an arrogance born from years of unchecked control. There was Carter, the weary enforcer with a twitchy grin, always tapping his fingers like he was counting down to chaos. And then Leela, the smooth-talking fixer whose hunted words hid a venomous bite. These weren't just pawns, they were extensions of Blake himself, threads in a tapestry of corruption he'd spent decades weaving. Blake, though, was the real enigma. High above the city in his glass-walled penthouse, he sat like a king surveying his crumbling empire. The lines on his face told stories of sleepless nights and ruthless decisions, but his ice-cold, calculating, unrepentant betrayed no hint of weakness. He'd built his network with precision, a fortress of favors and fear, and Maya's defiance was a crack in its foundation he couldn't ignore. Did he feel the walls closing in, or was he already plotting his next move? His mind churned with possibilities as he swirled a glass of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the city lights below. He wasn't a man who surrendered easily. Even now, with Maya dismantling his world piece by piece, he might still have a card left to ply, a dangerous, desperate gambit that could turn the tide. The thought gnawed at Maya, a splinter of doubt she couldn't quite shake. Back in the streets, the operation had taken a jagged turn. What started as a quiet infiltration had erupted into a cacophony of shouts and gunfire. Maya pressed herself against a crumbling brick wall, the rough texture scraping her shoulder as she reloaded her weapon with trembling hands. Her chest heaved, not from exhaustion, but from the adrenaline surging through her veins. She could still hear the echo of her last confrontation, a low-life thug who'd sneered at her, underestimating the storm she carried within. "You're nothing," he'd spat right before she'd flipped the script, leaving him sprawled in the dirt. That moment replayed in her mind, not as a victory, but as a lesson. Power unchecked breeds monsters, and justice demands a reckoning. The weight of that truth settled into her bones as she pushed forward. She wasn't alone in this fight, not entirely. There was Sam, the grizzled ex-cop who'd seen too much to stay silent. His voice rasped like gravel, every word heavy with the ghosts of cases he couldn't solve. He'd been the first to warn her about Blake, his hands shaking as he slid her a crumpled file stained with coffee and regret. "This goes deep, kid," he'd muttered, his eyes darting to the shadows like he expected them to strike. Then there was Priya, the tech genius with a nervous laugh and a knack for cracking systems others deemed unbreakable. She worked from a cluttered basement, her fingers flying over keyboards as screens glowed with the secrets she unearthed. These two weren't just allies, they were lifelines, tethering Maya to a purpose bigger than revenge. As the night wore on, the city seemed to hold its breath. A distant siren wailed, a mournful cry that underscored the stakes of this battle. Maya crouched atop a rooftop, peering through binoculars at the warehouse where Blake's latest deal was unraveling. Her heart ached with a mix of fury and sorrow at the lives he'd ruined. Sorrow for the innocents lost to his greed. She thought of the families shattered, the voices silenced. Also, he could sit on his throne of blood money, but she also felt a flicker of hope, fragile but fierce. If she could bring him down, if she could expose the rot and let the light in, maybe justice wasn't just a dream. It was a brutal, beautiful thing, forged in the fire of consequence. Down below, Carter barked orders, his twitchy grin replaced by a snarl as the deal went south. Leela hovered nearby, her composure fraying as she hissed into a phone, trying to salvage what she could. They didn't know Maya was watching, didn't know the threads of their world were unraveling with every move she made. Blake's network was a house of cards, and she was the wind ready to blow it apart. But the question lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. Would it crumble entirely? Or did he still have one last trick, a shadow move to pull from the depths of his cunning? The lesson here wasn't just about Maya's grit or Blake's folly, was about the cost of power, wielded without conscience. Every choice rippled outward, a stone dropped in a pond, and the waves could drown the innocent or cleanse the guilty. Maya knew that better than anyone. Her fight wasn't just against Blake, it was against the idea that might makes right, that corruption could choke justice and walk away unscathed. As she steadied her aim, the wind tugging at her hair, she vowed to prove otherwise. The consequences of abuse weren't abstract to her, they were the fuel in her veins, the steel in her spine. And in that moment, with the city sprawling beneath her and the dawn creeping over the horizon, she became more than a target. She became the reckoning.